For the last 2,000 years, it's been clear that Jesus' death and resurrection has been the high point, one of the tenets of our faith. Believing, perhaps for good reason, that it is in Jesus' death and resurrection that he breaks the unbreakable. Jesus breaks the grip of death on us. So at some level, without even understanding how or necessarily why, we believe that his death and resurrection is connected with our salvation. Now, of course, just because this is a mystery beyond our comprehension doesn't ever stop us from coming up with a bunch of concepts, trying to articulate in our human understandable language what exactly is occurring. And for the last 2,000 years, an awful lot of our tradition has been following what is known as atonement theology. We clearly heard about it in the book of the prophet Isaiah, where whatever penance needs to be done is taken out on a servant, an innocent servant, as opposed to the people that are supposed to get the punishment. And so this is the belief that Jesus dies on the cross as the innocent lamb who absorbs all the sin of humanity that we can't bear to stand ourselves in place of God taking it out on us. So I understand where atonement theology comes from. It comes from the Old Testament. It's clear that even in Isaiah the prophet goes into exquisite detail about how this is the truth. But we must realize that Scripture is often written in human language at levels that we understand. So oftentimes the Old Testament God the Father is shown, unfortunately, in kind of human terms. God is wrathful. God has a sense of justice, vengeance even. And in the Old Testament, we used to pray that God would allow us to see the day when he takes it out on our enemies. I think the church needs to apologize. We need to apologize to God for this caricature that depicts God as somebody that needs to take out vengeance. And we also need to apologize for the countless Catholics that have been living with their guilt, fearing God first and then loving God second. The first commandment is that we're supposed to love God above all things. But with this idea that we are so broken and so sinful that God has to punish somebody and took it out at his own son, leaves us psychologically scarred, such that it's probably impossible for us to ever get to the point of perfect contrition. We're always constantly afraid of God. So I think there's other alternative approaches, not that different, still using the same scripture, still using the same facts, but seeing it from a different light that might be a little bit more life-giving. Perhaps something that moves a little bit closer to a deeper understanding and love of God. Jesus says that there's no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. And that lines up very clearly with what happens in the Passion. And it lines up even with atonement theology. However, if we emphasize this notion that it is out of love that he does this, that changes the picture a little bit. It's not a matter of God punishing somebody. He has to take it out on somebody, so it may as well be on Jesus instead of the people. God doesn't need to misdirect. God doesn't need to punish in that way. But it does beg the question of what's going on. We also believe that Jesus is fully human and fully divine, two natures. And so, to some degree, the person that's on the cross is God himself, not a victimized son, but God himself allows him to be killed in this manner. And is it a case that God has to pay for the sins, or somebody has to pay for the sins, so God takes that out of his own pocket to put it back in? I don't know that that's a very healthy understanding. Perhaps we can look in our own human condition and see a different, perhaps more human, but also divine aspect of this. Inasmuch as we all have had people that we know and love that are suffering, and we, out of compassion, almost wish that we could take away their suffering, even if it caused suffering to ourselves. How many people have seen a dying loved one on their deathbed and wish that they could trade lives, particularly if it's somebody that's much younger and has life to live, and an older grandparent might wish that they could change places? We do so out of love, or we wish that we could do so out of love. It's not out of atonement. So in a certain sense, God allowing himself to die on the cross is a sign of compassion. God is able to do this because he loves us so deeply that he's able to let go of whatever sense of justice, whatever sense of vengeance there is. And so really, I think that Jesus dying on the cross is an example and a model for us. There are times when we could be altruistic or have a martyr complex and just offer up our lives for the sake of other people. And many people are doing that right now in the front lines as they fight the pandemic. But I think at another deeper, more personal level, we could die to ourselves every time that we turn the other cheek. When we let go of our sense of righteousness, when we let go of our sense of need for justice, which often turns out to be truly vengeance, when we allow people to be human and accept their brokenness and we move on, when we demonstrate mercy, we start to understand what the God of love is all about. So Jesus dies in a very excruciating way, and it's not because we are so sinful that he has to go in this manner. Rather, it's an example of us, of how broken we sometimes are in our own minds and hearts, and how we need to let go of that so that we can truly be compassionate towards one another. When we let go of our need for vengeance or righteousness, whatever, and we allow ourselves to lay down our convenience, our righteousness for the sake of other people, we not only end up on the cross, but we also end up raised in the end.